and welcome to Ujima Wednesdays. My name is Sierra Peters, and it's Earth Month at Ujima. This week, we are joined by stand-up comedian Kendra Dawsey, who will perform a set with climate and environmental themes. And I'll just read your bio really quickly. Kendra Dawsey is a stand-up comedian and writer based in Boston. Their razor-sharp wit and engaging delivery has earned them spots opening for Eddie Pepitone.
Pepitone, yeah.
Pepitone, okay. Jenny Yang and Michelle Buteau. And they have been featured as a comic in residence at the renowned comedy studio. They've also been featured on Kevin Hart's Lyft Comics series on the LOL network. Kendra's writing and performing has been featured in Revolutionary Space's online talk show, Tea Party Tonight, and on their weekly Twitch show, Late Night, Left Night with Kendra Dawsey. Kendra's comedy combines abrasive criticism, raunchy setups, and whimsical punchlines for a hysterical time for all audiences. Welcome, Kendra.
Hi, thank you so much everyone for joining. So I figured the plan for today was I will do some of my comedy and then I'll talk about how to kind of wrap themes of environmentalism into comedy. So I am going to put you on gallery. I've done a lot of Zoom shows. I've been performing comedy for a while. So I know we did have a disclaimer about like people anonymizing themselves. It is helpful for me if you don't have a lot of, noise in the back, if you want to turn on your mic so I could know what people think is funny. That's how it usually is. If you are okay with putting your camera on, that also helps and that won't like interrupt, but I understand if you are not okay. So that's what I figured we'll do. A little background on me. I have a cat, so it is around the time where she is usually fed. So you might hear meowing in the middle of my set. That is just my cat. Her name is Janet Jackson and she is small and fierce. She's also very loud. If she gets really annoying, I'll bring her in and she is very cute. People might love Janet Jackson more than me. But that being said, I figure we'll get into it. I'll talk about myself a little bit and then I have a slideshow to show people. So I'll just ask for like screen recording capabilities after, or screen sharing capabilities after that. All right, so everyone, I recently quit my job. I quit my job in February during the blackest month of the year. Very exciting. Yes, thank you so much. I had a full-time job, but it was in the nonprofit sector. So I quit my job mainly because my salary was good vibes and dirt. That is all I was getting paid in. But now I have more time to pursue stand-up comedy like I am now doing this right now, obviously. I'm really excited about that because now I will get paid in a substance use disorder. It's going to be great. Just drinking alcohol. I do have a few like mixed feelings about my career path. So I don't know how many of you know this. I'm friends with someone who works at Ujima, Paige Curtis. She's very awesome. And we both graduated from Yale. That's the longest I've gone without telling people that fact about myself. So you're welcome. I'm incredibly humble. Yes, I know. No, it's weird. I graduated from Yale and I feel like when you graduate from a school like that, they give you two choices in what to do. And it's like either you could be a teacher or work in nonprofits, or you could be a war criminal. Like those are the two options. It's like actively destroy the earth or teach kids. That's what you're presented with, right? So I kind of like got into environmental education. I got into that. It is really fun. I got to like do cool things with kids, but I don't think I was quite the right person for it in some ways because probably once a month at my old job, I wanted to look a 12-year-old dead in the eyes and say, if you don't take out the next ExxonMobil CEO, we're all fucked. And that is not what you should do when you're trying to get kids to like the environment, right? Like that, those aren't good vibes. I did a lot of cute things in my last job, a lot of cutesy things. So one thing I did is we made a garden for a kindergarten class. So we built the garden beds, put dirt in them, and the first time the kindergartners came out, we each gave them a seed to plant in the garden, right? So I was going down a big line of 5-year-olds giving out a pumpkin seed, then a sunflower seed, a pumpkin seed, then a sunflower seed. And then a 5-year-old looked up at me with huge eyes and said, listen, I want a sunflower seed just like my friend. Why did you give me a pumpkin seed? I don't want this. I want a sunflower seed. And what I wanted to say to this child was, listen, half the world is going to be swept away in tsunami before you even get your dick wet. Just put the seed in the ground. I'm teaching you some survival skills. This is important. But I left my last job willingly. I did not get fired for cursing at a kid. I knew if I said that, it would have been like all these things, like, it would have been like, what do you mean, like, get your dick wet? And it's like, well, when a mommy and a daddy love each other very much. But then he would have found out when the tsunami came, so it doesn't matter. There were a few issues at my old job that I think a lot of nonprofits share. So like it was technically in public health, which obviously intersects with, the environment and climate change. Like people can't be healthy if they are sweating and dying, or, being overheated, or facing like record snow, right? So it was public health. And I had that job during the George Floyd protest, the June 2020 George Floyd protest, which was weird. My job was like mostly white people, I worked with mostly white people. I didn't work exclusively with white people, but my supervisor was white. And that was just a weird time, I think, for everyone. Like, remember during that time when like there are all these very concrete conversations about police abolition and like reform, and then the ruling class was like, hey, we're going to get rid of some 30 Rock episodes, like, because we hear you, we're listening to you, so it was just a bizarre time. But obviously I was very distressed during that time. I was also moving, and I think there was like a 24-hour period where I just didn't sleep because I was like stressed out, because I know a lot of people in Minneapolis as well, and then stressed out about the nation. And I was like, I have to move all my stuff across town. I just remember the day afterward, my supervisor, she was one of those white people that started asking, how are you? And like, a pointed way, you know what I mean? Like, it's not just like the walking past being like, hey, how are you? It was like, Kendra, how are you? And she wanted me to answer honestly. And I understand. My supervisor also had practice because I was not the only Black person on staff. So she got to ask, she had a few trial runs before she asked me, but I didn't feel comfortable telling the truth, because I feel like the truthful answer would be just swigging some red wine and saying like, shit fucking sucks, man. But like, you can't do that at 10:30 a.m. Like that is not appropriate for a work meeting. So I did the usual, like, oh, I'm just, I'm very tired. That was such a weird period of time. Like, there were some white people where it was like, oh, you're asking this because you care about me as a person. But I think there were some white people that were like, hey, I remember that Black person I went to high school with. This is the time to reach out to them after 6 years and be like, how are you doing? It's like, obviously the answer is bad. Give me money. Come on. Like, if you want to help me, get me some food from the Cheesecake Set Factory so I could stress eat later. Okay. But anyway, yeah, so that was like distressing. It was one of a few reasons I did leave. You do want to go to workplaces that value people, but I still do care about the environment, even though that is not, I'm not in like the environmental studies field right now. I think a lot of my time working in areas with the environment have kind of informed a lot of things in my life beyond that. So one thing is, I am a socialist. I'll come out with that. Unrelated, I use all of my roommate's stuff, and very important note that. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about socialism. When most people in this country hear it, they're like, oh, there's no like socialism. That means like one person asks soap. No, we have different soap. My roommate is white. When a lot of people hear socialism, they're like, oh, that means no more private property. Like that means everyone's going to have to share everything. And I'm like, I would never advocate for a world where I have to share my menstrual cup with people, you know, like why would we want that? That's gross. See, exactly, Sarah, you're frowning. It's gross, like no shared toothbrushes, no shared any of that, right? What socialism actually means is that, you know, people will get what they need. And we have a system where, you know, workers are able to own that system where everyone is working on stuff and people are able to get what they need. So it's not so much we share menstrual cups, is that each American gets one menstrual cup. That's how it is. And then if you're afraid of menstrual cups, don't worry, we will have tampons too. I know some people aren't that crunchy. I'm the crunchy lesbian, so I know about it. My ex went to Smith College, so I know about it. You gotta know about menstrual cups. So you know, I think when I talk about socialism, I do know people are scared. And I've done sets about like kind of these things that I've talked about kind of all over the country. There's definitely people that aren't too into it because they have some misconceptions. There's of course like, you know, people are like, oh, but under socialism, no one will want to work hard. And it's like, do people want to work hard now? Like, what is the motivation? Like, oh, I'm going to work hard so I can see like Elon Musk shoot a car into space for no reason. Like, that's not motivation for me. But yeah, I am looking for new jobs. And this time I am searching. I am a little frustrated with the job interview search. And I'm only really doing it because I learned when you don't have a job, you don't earn money, which is wild. I'm very offended by this. This is a new discovery. My parents didn't tell me this. Also, I learned that if you have a nice white friend, they will take things from Walmart for you. So keep that in mind. But I'm doing job interviews now. It's always kind of like stressful. I don't really like them, honestly, for a few reasons. One, the questions they ask are just very obvious. Like when you go to a job and they ask you like, what makes you interested in job? The real answer is, even though you might be interested in for other reasons, the real answer usually is, I need money to survive. Like that basic one, like I need money to buy food, goods, and services so I could continue existing, you know? And then they ask you like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? In 5 years, I will probably still need money. I don't anticipate that changing. I don't think too much crazy is going to happen. And then they have the question where it's like, oh, where do you see yourself in, or no, like, tell us about a time where there was a struggle that you had to learn to overcome, right? And my answer usually is, well, this one time I wanted food, but I had no money. So then I learned to look for jobs. You know, I'm a problem solver at heart. That's really what I am, very important. But you know, we're all just trying to manage in this world. I know a lot has happened. Like I'm here to talk about the climate. I will talk about the climate, but of course there's so many things kind of compounded on that, a lot of issues. There's, you know, everyone survived June 2020 when there was just protests everywhere. Then there was a pandemic, and now there's another pandemic, and the government's like, yeah, you're gonna have 2 viruses. Good luck with that. And one thing I don't like is people who just insist on being like positive about the whole thing when it's like objectively, like you could read the newspaper and it's just like things aren't going great, which is fine it's fine to acknowledge that. But there are some people that are like, oh yeah, well, like, you know, don't get so down about yourself. Have you tried like drinking tea? Do you do yoga? And it's like, I can't yoga my way out of a heat wave. Susan, like, what is the idea here? What am I going to do? Like yoga the bad vibes away? I'm going to yoga in front of the Supreme Court. That's not how it works. It's it is frustrating. It doesn't feel like, sometimes it doesn't feel great. It does feel like very absurd sometimes seeing things like like a lot of us here, we work for, or you work for an organization or are a member of an organization that seeks to really explicitly share funds within marginalized communities, et cetera, et cetera. There are so many jobs where people don't do like anything. There's so many jobs where it's just like, I tell rich people to get richer, or so many jobs where it's just like, I give Elon Musk the coordinates to shoot something into space. And I don't really understand. One, I do want those jobs and I would mess them up on purpose. I'd be like, here are the wrong coordinates. Elon would not shoot the car into space. He'd just shoot it into his own backyard, but I would be getting paid until I mess up, like that is what I would do for this country. I will briefly go off topic. I'll end on this. So I made jokes about my ex being from Smith. I am a lesbian. You could probably tell from the haircut. I do that on purpose. The haircut is explicit. This is kind of, how like there are frogs in the Amazon who are red so that people don't eat them. That's this and an outfit, Since I live in Boston, I perform for a lot of straight white guys named Sean, and I always make it clear for them, like, I do this on purpose. But I have to say, probably the gayest part about me, through all I talked about, I know loving the environment is stereotypically gay and all of that, but I think the gayest part about me is that I am in an extended cat custody dispute. With that person from Smith. This is why I don't trust Smith grads anymore. Any of the other 5 colleges, you can hit me up, but Smith is scary. It's not the cat I have. This other cat was taken from me. Her name was Tula, and I got her when I moved in with my ex. My ex was white. Maybe she still is. We haven't spoken in a while, and I am Black. So we got a gray cat, so the cat would look like both of us, obviously very important. And now I'm worried, like since my ex has sole custody of the cat, I'm worried that the cat's hair is never going to look right again. Like the cat needs to get to my side of the family so I could put some cornrows in her hair so she'll look nice. But yeah, it was difficult. So we broke up right before the pandemic. I did not check the news in China before we broke up. I was like, if I checked the news, I would have been like, I could do this another 6 months, but broke up right before the pandemic. She agreed to move out. I still had the cat for a little bit. And then she was like, okay, once I'm settled, I'll get the cat. And I noticed partway through the pandemic, my cat was doing this very interesting motion where she was like kind of twerking in place, just kind of doing this. And I thought, oh, she's a kitten. She just does weird things. Who knows, like whatever. But then I looked up that little dance online, and that dance meant that my daughter was feeling submissive and breedable. She wanted to get pregnant very badly. She was like, I'm gonna keep these. I don't care who the baby daddy is. I just want one. My cat had become, those Lifetime movies about the teen girls that randomly get into a pregnancy pack. My cat wanted to be all of them. So she was in heat. I called all the vets. I called every single vet. They were not taking any new people because of my cat, or not because of my cat, because of the pandemic. I think the worst way to get COVID would be from a horny cat, I would say. So I did my best to find a solution. For any cat people here, there are 10 of us total. There must be one other cat person. I refuse to believe there's not another cat person. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Great. Okay. For everyone else, for anyone that interacts with the cat, there are 2 albums on Spotify, 2 whole albums called Music for Cats, made by a man named David Ty, who was just like, what would cats listen to on their morning commute, and made 2 albums about it, which is wild. But I would play this music at night in my cat. Oh, nice. Hell yeah. Okay. See a cat. Hell yeah. That's what I like to see. She's sweet. My cat's probably right by the door. So at some point during the Q&A, when I'm listening to things, I'll bring her over. But I played that cat music for my cat. She finally fell asleep. And, I think, Oh, okay. Oh, no, it's fine. My roommate opened the door for the cat. At some point, she finally fell asleep because I would play this music, and then I was able to fall asleep because she was no longer yelling. And I completely forgot about this period of my life until December 2020, end of the year, when I was on my phone at work and up popped Spotify, and Spotify said to me, here's your top 2020 songs, or like, here's your top most listened to songs in 2020. Here's your top 5 most listened to songs. These are the songs you loved over the year. And everyone's song number 3 was a dehornifying cat banger. And I listened to it and I just got flashbacks of being in that small apartment with the cat. And I just have to say, everyone keeps talking about the pandemic being unprecedented, all those things like in these unprecedented times. And it's been 2 years, it's probably pretty precedented now. But if you had told me more than 2 years, 3 years ago by this point, that one consequence of the pandemic would be your cat gets so horny, she permanently ruins your Spotify recommendations, I would have no idea what you were talking about. I would be like, what do you mean? Excuse me. All right, everyone, that is the end of my set. Thank you. I'm glad some people are, I was like, oh no, I like it. Thank you. That's the end of my set. Now I want to fill the rest of the time to kind of talking about issues of like media, climate change, and kind of addressing it basically. So if I may, I'm going to switch kind of gears a little bit, if I may. Oh, cool. I can share the screen. Awesome. So I'm going to share the screen. You can see that. That's my little face. I wasn't sure what we were going to do first, so I'll just do a slideshow. I have this. You're all here for it. That's awesome. Thank you so much. We have a few quick slides, and I'll kind of share my thoughts on this topic as someone who has kind of been in these worlds for a little bit. But you read my bio in terms of comedy, but you might be wondering like, what? Oh, actually, no, this is why I have. So I was looking through, I was like kind of getting together some like materials for this, and I saw 3 years ago today, I made this, it's not like a great joke, but I was like, oh, wow, like that, climate change affects everything. This was just an observation I made, I think at work, because I did see a bird panting. But like climate change is a big thing. It affects everyone in some manner. No matter where you are, there's probably some effect you have from it. If it does not affect you at all, you are probably someone who is rich enough to have caused or exacerbated climate change, and you should feel bad at minimum. So it's something that people are going to be talking about, I think, increasingly. Like, I know that it's still seen as a partisan issue, even though we have so much more evidence and proof of it happening, every single day, like the heat waves in Britain and all of that. And yeah, it's like, I think it's like kind of any other like huge political thing or trend, whether it's negative or positive, where comedians are going to make jokes about it, whether those jokes are good or not, or another thing. But even if you're not trying to, like address climate change in a way where it's like, oh, like we should do this, you're probably like, comedians are probably going to make observations. So as I was kind of implying before, and I'll move this down, you might be asking like, okay, what qualifies this bitch to speak on this topic? Here are my credentials. Okay. So first thing is, I have, as I mentioned, I talked about like being an environmental educator, but I've spent 7 years of my life doing that. You might see my cat trying to get in. Sorry about that. So I've spent like 7 years of my life being an environmental educator. Through pre-K through 8, my last job, I ran a food justice paid youth internship where we did a lot of gardening and talked about ways to like affect the community. Like I said, it's mostly like gardening and food justice, and those things are related to climate change, especially when we're talking about like food sovereignty and who's going to have the seeds to plant when agriculture gets more difficult. But I also taught about natural habitats. So I helped run a program called Schoolyard Habitats in Boston, Connecticut, sorry, not Boston, Connecticut, where we basically put like a lot of native plants in areas, plants that would attract other native species like caterpillars, monarch butterflies was a big one, and kids would be able to check it out and be like, oh, cool, like here's like this insect, here are birds, et cetera, et cetera. I have performed stand-up comedy for 5 years. Sierra, thank you so much for reading off my bio. It's very awesome to hear that someone likes Michelle Buteau, because I like her a lot too. I was very lucky enough to open for her, and she's very nice, and she smells good. One person entered the waiting room. I'm just gonna add them if that's okay. I'll just, oh, they're added, never mind. Okay, oops. Wait, sorry, I am going ahead by accident, and then you might not even be able to see it because I have this. I'm just going to get this out. Okay. So I've also done a little bit of activism that I won't get into in case there are feds. That's a joke, but also you probably should talk about your activism too much. But I have been involved in some like activist circles. Sometimes there are other things, but all of these struggles are interconnected. If you liked my comedy set and you're like, hey, I'd like to check Kendra out, see where they're performing. I do perform around Boston now. I am moving to New York, but if you are in New York City, but I'll also come up here. You could follow me on Twitter and Instagram at bossy_Dawsey down there. The Twitter is locked because I am applying to jobs and I don't want people to know how ratchet I am, but you are allowed. And then I also have my website, and the website's a little older, but if you scroll down, you can see my show dates. So we're gonna keep going with this. All right. So climate themes and broader media. I was thinking about this. I am someone that's kind of passionate about both like social issues and furthering them, like being like, hey, yeah, like we should have a more just world. And then also art. I do love stand-up comedy, even though even though there are some issues with it. It's obviously a male-dominated field. It's doing it, you just have to deal with a lot of annoying people, unfortunately, but I do love it. Those are two things I do very care about a lot. So I was thinking like, okay, how do we like kind of create a theory about it? And I realized, especially having discussions and also my own thoughts with media, is that I think it is helpful to frame any sort of media and art that's about climate change or any sort of issue using these three categories. So there's educational media, like Bill Nye the Science Guy and Inconvenient Truth, that documentary that came out like a decade and a half ago almost. So yeah, that's obviously meant to teach people like, hey, here's the science behind this, or hey, here's the information behind this. And then like, here's the information for you, here's what you should know. And then there's media that is more of just like kind of venting and showcasing feelings. So I kind of framed it as, this is showcasing my feelings I have regarding climate change. So that I would put Don't Look Up, which is that Oscar nominated movie that was made by Adam McKay and someone who used to work for Bernie Sanders, David Sirota, and that there was a lot of discourse around that movie. And I watched it just because I was like, oh, I figure I should keep my like eye on the, or like finger on the pulse. And you see that movie, it's obviously, you know, it has a political agenda, but it doesn't really say like, there's not really a like, hey, here's what we could do. It's kind of like, yeah, this is why the media is so messed up. And also it focuses on the media when obviously more would be happening. It focuses on media and government because it was written by someone who was in politics and someone who is like a pretty prominent entertainer. And then there's media that actively promotes solutions towards climate change or even promotes values that are important for facing climate change. So Inconvenient Truth does do this. I have political criticisms of it, but it does do it as media saying like, hey, this is what you should do. If you do have any more examples, I would love to hear this. I kind of have my own thoughts about why they may, you know, like there's not as much media doing that. But also sometimes it's kind of boring and didactic, like to be like, oh, here's how you organize your friends in some media, but it happens. So all of these forms of media may or may not, but they probably should have a call to action. So Inconvenient Truth is like, hey, you should do this. Don't Look Up. It doesn't really say anything like, hey, you should do this, but it's like, oh, our government should not be like this. And then all of them are important and have their own place. Like I said kind of before when I posted that little like clip I made on my Facebook, like climate change, since it's going to be a big thing, I think we're going to see a lot of the like, oh, like this is me being upset about climate, or like these are my feelings towards climate change. Some people don't find like, I guess there was a lot of discourse around Don't Look Up that was like, oh, like this doesn't provide any solutions, which like it would be cool if it did, but I think there is artwork that doesn't necessarily provide solutions. Artwork, it can, but when we think of, you know, any works from like works of art like the Mona Lisa or even TV shows, it doesn't always promote a solution. Sometimes it's kind of like a venting a cry. And then also, if they do promote solutions, sometimes the solutions have been shown in real life not to work. But they are all important and have their own place. So I'm gonna move forward. So I'm gonna use the most prominent art form of our time, memes, to kind of show examples of all of these. I found a lot of memes from different Instagrams. So there's climate memes, that's Instagram, I think one. There's like climate memes 420, which actually hasn't really been active in the past like 3 years, but it was from a teen, I think in Singapore, who was like, oh, I'm tired of the government. I'm tired of like there not being any discourse around the climate. So I'm going to make a lot of memes about it. And memes are cool because you make one, and if it's funny, then it like spreads. You know, it doesn't cost a lot of money to make memes. You could do it, just like screenshot something, but it's not like something like, you know, painting or music where you have a lot of input. So here we have some memes. Here's one, an educational meme about climate change using SpongeBob, my favorite meme person. So it's like, come closer, I need awareness that meddling with the Earth's water cycle can lead to extreme weather events and thus hardships in agriculture and infrastructure around the globe. With memes, I feel like the longer the text is, the more likely it is to be educational. Expressing feelings around climate change. So we have these two memes. When older generations question your eco-conscious lifestyle, and I believe that's from Malcolm in the Middle, is like the future is now, old man. So it's like, oh, like people talk to me about my lifestyle, but I do this. And then I do like this meme layout. The dad, why is my sister named Rose? Because your mom loves roses. Thanks, Dad. No problem. Reduce CO2 emissions. I like it because you get to just imply that someone loves something by calling this kid a hypothetical silly name. So these are kind of like expressing feelings and thoughts. And then we have direct calls to action using one of my favorite childhood girl groups, the Spice Girls, saying, if you want to be my lover, if you want to be the lover of the creator of this meme, and we know meme creators are high value in this world, you got to get an understanding that climate change is real. So they have reusable water bottles, grocery bags, involved in local environmental efforts, going into public transit, and then voting for leaders that support climate change. So these are memes. Oh, thank you. Thanks, James. Thanks so much. So these are just some memes that show this. Memes are just the easiest way to show these things. I'm sure you have some examples of things that take a little bit more time to create, but I like memes. We all look at them a lot. We know what's going on with them. So all that being said, I do want to talk about kind of my theories on stand-up in this. And stand up and social change in general. So I do think it can be powerful in sharing an individual's point of view, especially if they are marginalized. As a queer, you know, like a Black lesbian doing stand-up comedy, and sometimes I'm in the most unusually placed names in New England. It was powerful for me to be in a situation where a crowd of people, they didn't have to listen to me, but they were drawn to listen to me because I was the only one in the room with a microphone, right? And I think people, whether they are women or like trans or non-binary, whether they're people of color, if you have not been in many situations in your life where people listen to you because of all of the isms in our world, stand-up comedy does feel good because you're like, okay, people have to listen to me. A few people mentioned some comedians I think are really good examples of doing that. So Robin Tran is excellent. She is hilarious, and she's a trans woman comic who has been doing a lot of pushback on the recent wave of comics, kind of like cisgender comics addressing trans issues poorly, right? So she's done a lot of funny pushing back against that, and also important pushing back against that. I think this is still true for women in comedy, especially like, unfortunately, comedy it's not exclusively male, but there's a lot of male comics. So I think they're kind of like, their voices are lifted. My personal theory on stand-up is this: it is very cool. I love it, like I said, but it can be limited in enacting social change itself. So I mentioned Dick Gregory here. Dick Gregory was a comic who started during the Civil War era in the 1960s. He was the first Black comic that performed, had an interview done on him on like late night television as part of one person show. And he broke a lot of barriers for Black comics. His comedy was very explicit in talking about racial issues at the time. He addressed them. He has one joke that's really funny where he's like, I went into a diner and like, Birmingham, Alabama. And I came in and they said, we don't serve colored people here. And I said, I don't eat colored people. And like, he was known for being very funny. I think he is very funny. And I think his albums were some of the highest selling albums during that time where everyone had vinyl. That being said, because of the history of like consumption of culture, especially Black culture or culture from people of like marginalized groups, I'm sure there are people who listened to Dick Gregory and thought he was funny, but they might have still been racist after they left the show, right? They might have been like, oh, that's a funny guy, however, I'm still going to vote for this law. That being said, I'm not trying to discount a lot of what Dick Gregory did. Beyond stand-up comedy, he did a lot for the civil rights movement. He was there like watching to make sure people didn't get hurt during protests. He did a lot of things. I would definitely look into him. One thing I will say is he himself said, humor can no more find the solution to race problems than it could cure cancer. We didn't laugh Hitler out of existence. And I think in the same way, humor can't itself solve climate change. I think it's definitely a good read on the culture, the jokes people are making. And it might be the start in one person being like, huh, I'd never thought of it like that. But we can't, it's not like, oh, we're funny and now that's how climate change is going to end. Or, oh, I harassed, Elon Musk. So that's how climate change is going to end. Even though I do love making fun of him on Twitter. I definitely encourage people to do that. So we talked about how stand-up could be empowering for like an individual and their life. But on the flip side, as we have probably all seen, stand-up could also provide a platform for humor that aligns itself with more powerful fascist movements worldwide. So most strikingly now, the trans people are weird humor. So Dave Chappelle, that is someone that, I think a lot of people like to show, and then they saw his stand-up, his most recent stand-up over the past year where he just keeps talking about trans women, which is weird because like it's very weird to focus on a part of the population that is disenfranchised and also like hasn't really done anything to you. And then Joe Rogan, also a name that I don't like bringing up usually, but he had comments about like shooting homeless people on his podcast recently because they're annoying. So like those are explicitly kind of like, Joe Rogan's especially is explicitly like fascist. Talking about shooting homeless people is not good. So there is, there's a lot of stand-up where I think also it's become such a like weird war where there's a lot of stand-up that in addition to being harmful is also generally not funny. It's not well crafted. It's not good. The joke is kind of weird, but people will support it because the point of view of the comic is like trans people are weird. Or trans people or, suck. Someone said very weird obsession. One thing I've said is like, if there was someone at an open mic that just had 2.5 hours on trans women, you would be like, he needs to process some things himself, but he would not be celebrated in the way Dave Chappelle is. But continuing on. So that being said, there's a few things that are helpful. If you want to pursue stand-up comedy when talking about issues of climate change, different mediums have different forms, different goals in themselves. The main goal of stand-up comedy is for people to laugh. That should Not to be, I think like I've heard a lot of like upsetting white men say this, and not to be like them, but the point of stand-up comedy is to laugh. Of course, you could have stand-up secondary goals that could support that one while still speaking to your point of view, but people do go to stand-up comedy shows to escape. So if you're going to bring up like the slow collapse of our society, you do need to be funny about it. You could be earnest about it. You could have an emotional truth to it, but the set can't just be you being sad, right? Another thing is you should probably decide which of the three kinds of media your set is going to be. Will it be educational? Will it be venting? Or will it incite a riot? This is a joke, but a lot of stand-up comedy, I think, especially now, now that there's like not as much of a presence of characters, meaning people going up on stage pretending there's someone else in stand-up comedy, a lot of it does kind of seem like venting or telling your own personal story. You could, of course, include some like education in that, but you also do have to make sure it's funny. Like people don't want to just read off the Wikipedia page or listen to someone reading off the Wikipedia page for climate change, right? So general things with stand-up comedy, you think these are obvious, but some stand-up comics struggle with this. So it helps to be likable. Like I said, it seems obvious, but there are some people who don't know that yet. And of course, you could be like a likable scumbag. I think there are some comedians who have crafted characters that aren't themselves, that are like, oh, like I'm a lovable douche. But you do need to be likable. The more people like you, the more laughs you're going to get. It's helpful to be likable. It does help to be relatable. And then finding a way to be relatable about your experiences is good. I'll admit that person. So not everyone in the audience has to be a queer environmentalist of color, but everyone has probably felt like an outcast in a given situation. So relating your specific experience to like, hey, like because of these parts of my identity or because of this part of my history, I felt like this, you might have felt like this. And then observational is always good. Pointing out the absurdity in something that is in something that is bothering you. Observational humor, I think it was popular in the 90s with Seinfeld, which like I think for people around my age, Seinfeld feels like a little hackneyed because it was so copied when it first came out. But like for a time, Seinfeld was really popular because he was like, what's the deal with this? And if you want to do something that's like, what's the deal with climate change? I think that is perfectly fine. Or like, what's the deal with government inaction? Because those are important questions to ask. So last but not least, that being said, even if your art alone does not change the world, it is good to enjoy art to be less miserable. I think this is sometimes something that gets lost in the shuffle when talking about art and stuff. I think sometimes people expect any piece of art or media to just solve the problems, and it doesn't have to do that. There's a lot of doom and gloom around the climate movement, and there doesn't have to be. Sometimes media could just like acknowledge, be like, hey, I feel your pain and that this is bad, but we're here together and we have to acknowledge that. And also we have to take action. So I think that's one thing that's very important with the climate movement is sometimes it does feel overwhelming, but remembering that there's always something to be done is important, and finding community and people that also realize that there's something to be done. That could be the goal of art itself. Also, if you're sad all the time, you're less likely to do it. Things, take it from me, press person on Lex Pro, hell yeah. Being sad all the time doesn't always help. Being angry sometimes helps a little bit, but you gotta turn that anger into action. Definitely don't want it to be in a like, oh, let's talk about what we appreciate kind of thing. Like there are some things to appreciate, but also I think sometimes being appreciative kind of covers up being like, oh, you should be thankful for this. So don't complain, and we want to get away from that. That being said, I probably went over a little bit. I am so sorry. That is the end of this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you all for listening to me talk so long. But yeah, thank you. That is kind of, those are my thoughts on it, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have some.
Woo! Thank you so much, Kendra. Does anybody have any questions? Ia in the chat says, this is excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yes. Okay. Karen has a question, and then I have a question. And
I don't really have a question, but I do have some feedback. I had a cat just like that cat. And every time And she didn't do that around other cats. She only did it around male visitors to my house.
Interesting.
And she had a foot fetish, and she would just roll all over their feet. So you have my understanding and compassion.
Thank you so much. I love doing that set, talking about my cat, because then people also talk about their cats. And like, you know, I'm a cat lady. It's my cat, so my cat might have left. I wanted to show you one of my cat, but I think she left the room. But yeah.
The other thing I wanted to share is that I absolutely adore Wanda Sykes.
Oh, awesome. Yes. Wanda Sykes is
and
classic.
She has no compunction about being funny in response to something somebody says, but really going straight for the jugular. And I love her for that. I think there's something about older women comedians, and it's like, we just don't give a flying flip about what anybody thinks. We're going to tell you what we think. And I love it. So go for it.
Yeah, thank you. Dealing with hecklers is definitely a thing in comedy. And, you know, I think there's a lot of discussion around like, oh, people being attacked in comedy after the like slap heard around the world during the Oscars. And I would say like a lot of the people that face harassment in comedy are usually people of marginalized groups. So like queer people, trans people, women, but especially, you know, someone like Wanda Sykes, who is a Black lesbian. She like, I mean, now people shouldn't say, now if anyone says any shit to her, they're very brave because she is such a well-established comedian. But coming up, she probably like did face a lot of hecklers. And then you have to, if you're able to shut someone up in a funny way, you win over the audience. So that's something I need to practice a little bit. But I've done it a little bit too, because I started in Connecticut and that's another place. So wait, there's also some questions in the chat, but one, Sierra, did you have a question?
I did have a question. So maybe we'll just wrap up my question and then Nia's question.
Cool.
So my question is, what do you think about Kylie Jenner and her 3-minute jet rides?
Wait, she did comedy?
No, she wrote, you know, I was trying to, so she rides her jet from one side of LA to the other in 3 minutes. And I wanted you to be funny about it.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know she did that. Okay, I'm sorry. No, that's bad. This is one thing I say whenever I hear of rich people riching is like Mao made some points. And I know Kylie Jenner isn't a landlord, but this is why people are mad. Like that's screw Kylie Jenner and her jet. Jeez. Okay. Yeah, those are my thoughts. Mal made some points. And okay, so I'll quickly answer Nia's question. You seem to be very comfortable. Thank you, I appreciate that. But any comparisons between stand-up on Zoom versus in person? Of course. Yeah, in person, like stand-ups prefer in person. Obviously, there was a time where, I mean, arguably still, but yeah, there was a time where meeting in person was not safe. So a lot of stand-up comics who wanted to do it transition to Zoom. So I kind of got used to it for that. And that's why I kind of know the tricks of like, oh, if you know, show your face and I'll know like I'm being funny or and stuff like that. Yeah, I like it in person. You hear people's laughs. You kind of see the reaction on your face. It's easier to do crowd work and engage in the audience. It's kind of easier to feel the vibe of the audience. So you're like, so one thing a lot of comics will do is like, they'll sit in the back and see how the audience is reacting to other comics. And they're like, okay, like, let me like tinker with this punchline a little bit, or let me like turn up the energy. So it's just more tangible. I mean, yeah, stand-up is kind of, I think it's an art form that is, ideally it's meant to be, you know, live if it can be, which is like, I know you could see stand up on Netflix and stuff, but there is something special about like a live comedy show. Because on Netflix, they edit it so that the person seems good no matter what, even though the person is often good and working on it for weeks and weeks. But, you know, the person may do an hour and a half of material. They'll take out the half hour that doesn't do too well and then like just put everything that's funny there. So yeah, I would definitely, if you get the chance, go to a stand-up comedy show and like wear a mask if you would like, or, you know, when we're not in two pandemics, I would encourage you to do it because it's just like electric in a way. Next one. Okay, I'll answer questions quickly. How do you see stand-up comedy changing and how would you want it to be changing? That is a great question. I think there's a lot of ways it's changing. There's definitely the rise of people getting found out through online platforms like TikTok. I do have a TikTok. I think the handle is Bossy Dawsey, but I need to post more to TikTok. I think there's a rise in that, which could be good in some ways. I think there's also some people who are funny on TikTok and then they're like, oh, I'll do stand-up comedy. And then they realize there's a gap between those skills. And like being funny online is hard, is a skill. But I think that's different from the craft of stand-up. I think it's trying to get more diverse, but, you know, I think people like, you know, companies like Netflix and stuff do tokenization of voices, which stand-ups are also infamously, you know, it's not a high paying field. I would love to see more equitable pay in stand-up, but for I think a lot of diverse reasons, wages have kind of stagnated. So comics are definitely hungry for different things. So yeah, I would like more. I would like to see people like Netflix and even bigger comedy clubs kind of open up their doors to more performers and also pay more. But we'll see. How does someone get started in stand-up? Great question. You could look up open mics online. Just show up to an open mic. Open mics, that's where everyone is trying out their jokes. So most of the jokes are not good, but you keep doing it. And yeah, it's hard. I guess stand-up it's cool in a way because you don't need a lot of money to start doing it, but definitely like you need kind of some perseverance to keep doing it because it is like the open mic scene can be annoying. There's probably going to be a guy, if you are not a man, there's probably going to be a guy trying to hit on you. There's going to be annoying jokes, but yeah, you literally go to an open mic and then like write some jokes and then you keep honing your craft. So you listen to your jokes and then keep writing. And watch a lot of shows, but not yet in person. Yeah, I would watch it in person. I mean, watching it is cool too, but also in person, you're kind of like, oh, like this person's really funny. And then 5 years down the road, you're like, I saw that person in the basement in Boston. So that's pretty cool. One person raised their hand. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Unfortunately, we do have to cut it short because we're getting into member team time. But thank you so much, Kendra, for joining us today. I'm going to stop our screen share and say goodbye to YouTube.
Bye.